Have you ever wondered, what would it be like to work in an Edwardian castle? A place with a long and interesting history and filled with beauty, both on the inside and the outside. Well, I do work in an Edwardian castle. I work as a guide, but I also do other things around the castle, and I'm going to share a little bit with you right here. The place is called Tjolöholms Castle, or Tjolöholms Slott, and you find it in Sweden on the west coast, right south of Gothenburg. We are quite a large group of guides that work here, and that is because we have lots of visitors. Apart from showing people around the house, we also arrange weddings, afternoon tea, and lots of other events. And just as I said, I mostly work as a guide, but I also help out with other things around the castle, and that is especially our uniforms. We wear Edwardian style uniforms. And of course, to keep the castle updated with sizes, repairs and replacements takes quite a lot of time. Now here you can see a few of us, photos of the staff, and we wear Edwardian walking skirts and shirt waists. What you see here is a photo of the guides from 2 years ago. And here you can compare with a photo from 1910, a group of young ladies from Washington, D.C., as far as I can find out from internet. And I do think that we sort of live up to the expectations of looking properly Edwardian. But now, suddenly, this year, we had a new type of problem. We had 3 guys coming to work as guides. And they definitely needed to be dressed up properly. Because we can't exactly have them in their underwear, can we? So we had a few things. We had shirts, suitable sizes and styles. We also had some trousers. One of them is even using his own trousers, which is totally fine. And we had also a little bit of, the necessary accessories for a Victorian or Edwardian gentleman, which would be braces or suspenders and some ties or cravats. But we needed waistcoats. Now we are very lucky in that 2 of these guys actually wear the same size exactly, which makes it quite easy. So when deciding on making a waistcoat, we first had to determine the right sort of social status for the guides. The women who work as guides, we usually say that we represent a governess of the house. We are not the rich fancy ladies, but we are not either servants or maids. And the men working as guides need to sort of hit the same social level. Let's say he would represent a junior accountant, something like that. And on the screen here you see now 2 couples that we think represent this level in society. This is what we're aiming for. And when deciding on the details of the waistcoat, number 1 is it buttons up very, very high. The shirt is still to some degree seen as underwear, and the waistcoat should cover most of it. And while the waistcoat isn't very long, it is definitely always covering the waistband of the pants, the trousers. They are held up underneath the waistcoat with braces or suspenders, and there's definitely no gap in between, and the waistband is not visible. And here you can see that this gentleman has many buttons in his waistcoat, at least 6 I think he has. It is absolutely not ever any less than 5. And here's an interesting thing. This is called, I think it's called autochrome. And this is actually a real color photo from around 1906. Here you can see the gentleman to the right. He's wearing his clock chain very high up on his stomach. And that's the way you do it. Of course, this means that the pockets also has to be placed pretty high up. And you can see here on this gentleman, he definitely has a very high waistline, you could say. Now the photos I have been showing are of people that existed for real. I have been trying to look for photos that are not fake, because fake antique photos exist, but as far as I can tell, these are real. I also looked at actual mugshots from 1905 from North Shields. I think there are hundreds of them, and these are very interesting. And here you can clearly see that even the poorest in society, they dress the same way. And yet another source of inspiration you can use is TV series and films, movies. And here you can see an image from Sherlock Holmes, played by Robert Downey Jr. to the left, and Jude Law is playing John Watson to the right. And John Watson here is definitely dressed in a proper Victorian style, and fashion for men didn't change all that much, so this goes very well for the Edwardian style too. And here's another TV series, The Alienist. Here you see Dr. Laszlo Chrysler to the left, played by Daniel Bruhl, and then you see John Moore to the right, played by Luke Evans, and they are both wearing very nice and handsome waistcoats. Now, this is also set in an era that is a little bit too early for being called Edwardian, but you can clearly see that waistcoats could be double-breasted, a double row of buttons, and they can have collars, but I have chosen to not do that, at least this time. So here's a final image of exactly the type of waistcoat we are going for. Let's get started. So when it came to making the pattern for this waistcoat, we were lucky. We had one waistcoat hanging around that actually fit exactly for two of the guys. The third guy, he is using his own suit, works just perfectly, so this waistcoat is for the two other guys. And they wear the same size. So I'm just copying this waistcoat, but making a few changes to it, of course, to give it the right look. And of course, the first change is to raise the neckline. This one was pretty high to begin with, but now it's even higher. And second step was to add a dart in the front. There wasn't one to begin with in this waistcoat, and it is needed to give the right manly shape to this garment. So I'm just adding one by dividing the front piece lengthwise and then creating a dot at the bottom half or the bottom 2/3 of this division. I think I added about 1 centimeter or 1.2 centimeter in total width to the chest area here, and this is tapered down to the waist. After that, I raised the armhole maybe 2 centimeters and evened out the bottom edge, and finally I drew in a pocket. After that, I cut the front piece out and I adjusted the neck opening and the arm opening so that both the front and the back should match up. I added a bit of width across the shoulder blades to the back piece, but I had to remove that later, so that was unnecessary work. After that, the pattern was done. It's actually just 2 pieces for a waistcoat. Now for the fabric here, I am using some remnants, because this is a wearable muslin that I'm making. And the outer fabric is a mix of cotton and linen. It's striped in grey and black. And for the inside of the front, the facing, I am using a grey linen. Now for the inside, the lining, I am using this traditional shiny lining fabric. But for the back side, the visible outside of the back, I am using the same fabric as the front. So it's not made out of lining fabric. And this was just something that it's a wearable muslin I just cut, and I didn't really think about what I was cutting. So that's the way it looks. It's a bit untraditional, but this turned out to be a very wearable muslin, and we are using it, but it looks a little bit unusual. And as usual, I would like to ask you to give this video a like, a thumbs up, if you like it, and why not also hit the subscription button? It would mean a great deal to me. Now let's move on to sewing this waistcoat. But oops, I lied. I also cut the lining for the front piece. I already had the edge, the facing for the front, but now I'm adding the lining for the inside of the front. And after that, I'm sewing all the darts in one go. And after that, the sewing was quite straightforward. I did pin it up and bring it to work for a try on, and the guy who tried it, he really liked it, so he decided to make this into a wearable mock-up. But the sewing is still pretty basic. I added front pockets, one on each side. They are very basic but functional. And in the back I added this little tab to sort of adjust the size with. But the sewing was just, sewing all the outer pieces all together in one row and all the inner pieces all in one row. And after that I am pinning them together, right side to right side, all the way around. And one thing that I know as a tailor is that lining doesn't stretch. It needs to be a little bit bigger than the outer fabric because that fabric usually stretches. And that means if you put pressure on the garment, the lining will rip apart if it's too small, so it needs to be a tiny bit bigger than the outer fabric. I will be sewing this waistcoat together by joining the shoulders last and backlining the rest, just turning it inside out. This is not how a very properly tailored vest or waistcoat is done, but it will be perfectly fine for this situation. And I need now to check that the shoulder seams are exactly the same length when I'm sewing it together, so I'm measuring pretty carefully. And as I cut it out a bit roughly, because this was just the muslin, I am also marking the sewing lines here properly in the final shape that I want the garment to have. And after I've pinned and marked everything, I am sewing all around these two pieces all together, but I'm leaving 4 openings, and that are the 4 shoulders. No seam there. And after sewing all around, I'm of course trimming down the seam allowance. I know a lot of patterns give you 1.5 centimeter seam allowance or 5/8 of an inch, and that is way too much to leave in a rounded seam like this, the armhole. You need to definitely cut it down to 1/4 of an inch or 0.5 centimeter. I'm also of course clipping into the seam allowance, and to make it look nice when I turn it inside out, no, right side out. That's the way you say it. And of course, the shoulder seams are still open, and it is through one of these holes that you turn the whole waistcoat, which is pretty messy. And when you're done and have the right side out, you have to press all the edges. And this is how a tailor does it. You lick a little bit on your fingertips. And with these wet fingertips, you roll the edges of the fabric between your fingers until you have a very nice and smooth line. And the ditch of the seam should always be slightly towards the back side. And when you're happy with the edges here, you pin them and then you press them. You should really baste them if you do it properly, but pinning is okay. And of course, there are several ways to join the shoulder seams together. I'm choosing a very basic and easy method for this wearable muslin. I am marking the seam allowance, the seam line on the front pieces, and I am folding under along the seam line on the back pieces. I'm also pressing the back pieces, and then I am just simply putting the front piece inside the opening at the back piece and pinning them together. And this is of course quite fiddly. I am taking my time to make sure that the outer edges of the garment, the armhole and the neck hole, are perfectly straight lines, but I'm also making sure that the edges of the back piece are perfectly straight across the shoulder. And when I'm happy, I just sew straight across with the sewing machine through all layers at the same time. Don't tell anyone that a tailor did this, because this is not really proper careful sewing, but it's functional and it looks quite okay even on the back side. Final step is to top stitch all around the edges of the waistcoat, and now it's time for buttons and buttonholes. And you might be wondering why I am taking shortcuts here. I'm not using proper tailoring techniques, and it's even from a uniform for my workplace, so I really should take care, right? But the thing is, the fabric isn't really perfect for this use. It is quite a loose weave and very soft linen cotton mix, and it will not hold up to many years of wear and tear, and therefore I am sewing this in a little more simple way, because the fabric is simply not worth the effort. But no worries, even if this is a work uniform, it is not going to be used every week or every day, and it will definitely hold up for a couple of years wear, so this is not completely wasted effort either. And I do have a very nice wool fabric enough for a waistcoat and a pair of trousers, and I will definitely use this pattern with a few tweaks for that upcoming waistcoat, and there I will use more proper tailoring techniques.